Hello. On today's episode of the Comics Panel, we're going to be talking about war books. Okay. For Memorial Day, we're going to talk a little bit about war stories in comic books. At one time, they were a pretty big genre, basically through the late 30s and all throughout the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s,
late
really.
90s. Late 80s.
Late 80s is probably when they died off, but they were a huge selection of comic books. When I was growing up, war was a big category along with Westerns. And there was all kinds of stuff, great stories, all kinds of things. Everybody covered it. Charlton had a whole bunch of books. They had one just called War. They had a whole bunch of Our Fighting Forces, Fighting Marines.
Fighting Army.
Fighting Army, Fighting Marines, Fighting Navy, I think, there for a while. It was a huge genre. They told all kinds of stories. Everybody was in it. Marvel was in it. DC had a huge war department run by Joe Kubert, one of the greatest artists and writers in comic book history. He covered all kinds of things. I know Mike's a fan of GI Combat.
Yep. May he rest in peace.
Yeah.
Joe Kubert. He was the only guy that ever wrote me back when I wrote in this story.
Yeah.
And I was like, I lost that letter, but I wish I had it. But
Is that the guy that you didn't send a picture to?
No.
Okay.
But yeah, I love the GI Combat stuff. My favorite time period of GI Combat was the dollar books, where they had usually 2 Haunted Tank stories, which were my favorite, and then they had the OSS and a couple other storylines in there, but the Haunted Tanks were my favorite because they had 2 stories in each one of those.
I enjoyed reading the Fighting National Guard and the Fighting Coast Guard. Those are some of my best reads. Does G.I. Joe count?
G.I. Joe counts.
Yes. I enjoy G.I. Joe. I really
G.I. Joe
did.
does too.
G.I. Joe counts. He is a little bit more on the superhero side of it, because most of the DC
Haunted
stuff. Well, that was fantasy, but it was but
Being that-
they still had Weird War. I mean,
Yeah.
that was
Yeah,
cool.
Weird
They had
War
Creature
was a
Commandos
But I liked
Sword.
Haunted Tank.
and Star Spangled War stories, Unknown Soldier.
Did you enjoy the not the new 52 version of the Haunted Tank, but the one that was put out by Vertigo? It's a 5-part storyline.
Yeah, a few
Really?
years ago.
And
Yeah,
I didn't see
It was
that.
an interesting twist because you remember Jed Stewart was the commander of the tank,
Right.
and had the
and he
Civil
had this,
War
the
general.
link to
Followed him. Well,
the rebel general.
maybe I can't talk, but you got to read the
Do you have
Vertigo
it?
one. Yeah,
It's got
'cause
a
they-
good twist,
They,
too.
they
Borrow it.
switch it, and it's something that you don't really think at first. All of a sudden, when the ghost appears, you're like, "What are you doing here?" And it's just
It's a little bit
total
of,
mix.
and it's told in modern day
they're
Iraq,
in
I guess.
Iraq, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a great story.
Yeah.
And there's another one that was after that time period. It was just a standalone story.
Yeah.
I forget what it was, but the tank is there at the end. And the general says, "Aim here," and it was at an angle, so it did one of those
Yeah,
magic
arching shots. Yeah.
It was a great read, but the new 52 really disappointed me when they brought back GI Combat with the Haunted Tank, because Jeb Stewart is old,
Yeah.
Oh.
and he was like lost his
Well,
mind.
they never really
Yeah, I
continued
just
it.
didn't
It
really-
was.
yeah.
It was. Yeah.
It's just
But-
like a reboot, totally
Yeah.
different.
But the
Well,
Vertigo one was a great story.
Yeah, that was good. Well, there isn't as much focus on war stories today. Definitely throughout the 40s and things, that was a real American thing to get behind. I mean, Captain America #1
Captain-
cover of
yeah.
him. He's punching out Adolf Hitler. I mean, that's
Captain-
American and
Yep.
war all wrapped up in one. And of course, we've got also from Marvel,
Sergeant
Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos,
Yeah,
still
Captain
around
Amer-
today.
And Captain America and Bucky made an appearance in the
Yeah.
early Sergeant Fury books there as well. Later on, became the director of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yeah. Those weren't the only ones, too. There was a lot of EC books that came out. Well, not a lot, but there was Frontline Combat and Two-Fisted Tales. Those were probably the more, in my view, a little bit more intense storytelling from all different angles. Remorse from soldiers, things like that. That was really good. Warren put out some really good things in Blazing Combat. That was only 4 issues. It was oversized, like a magazine-sized black and white. That was really good. That was actually taken off the PX bases and not sold to the military because it was considered anti-American because they didn't show war in all its glory. They had a lot of negative things that go along with war, including American soldiers not doing something that was expected of them. And it covered everything from, all the way up to Vietnam, Korea, and...
Could this be a reason why the war comics have pretty much gone to the wayside, if you will, and comic book superheroes are coming forth because people don't want to see the realism of war and what it can entail versus let's get some good fiction,
a little bit more fantastic stuff going on.
Because you don't want to, even though we know what war is, you don't want to sometimes read about it, versus Superman getting a bloody nose. Well, that's Superman. It'll heal nicely.
Well, that was kind of part of the thing, in the 70s and into the 80s, you were able to tell more stories, the kind of stories you wanted to, in any genre. So the war comics kind of got a little bit different, I mean, Archie Goodwin was doing those, and he wrote some great stories, and you got to figure, all them guys served, either in World War II or Korea or even Nam. They were very familiar with it, so they wanted to tell the stories they wanted to.
I know they did try and tell some of the Vietnam stories, like Marvel did with Nam.
Marvel had the Nam. That was a long one.
I read that, so that's a good one. Yeah.
You read more than you thought.
I read more than I thought.
That kind of died out, but I think it's just a general taste of people's time periods.
True. Plus the idea is, too, like when the 70s did happen and the news media was showing Vietnam, people coming home and confidence, the realism finally hit home. It's not all good. And maybe that's why the comic genre kind of fell aside, saying, okay, let's get fantasy stuff in. This is my stupid opinion on this, but that's what I think, because you don't see them
the public
now.
changed.
And
plus there was a lot of anti-war stuff going on in the late 60s, mid to late 60s, so...
boycotts and stuff, so sure.
And a lot of those war stories, they weren't, like you mentioned, they weren't all pro-war. I mean, I remember reading so many stories that, had those twists in the end that... it was a great story, and then the ending comes around. I remember reading one story about, I guess, Jeb Stuart was a Nazi that didn't want to serve in the Third Reich, wanted out of the war, and he ended up helping the American. And he said, all right, we'll get you medical help, and everything else. At the end, a guard shoots him. That comes up to base because he thought he was taking the American prisoner. And it was just like those stories, and, as a kid, to kind of read it, it's like, oh, wow, it's interesting story, but when you get older, you think about
you really see what they're saying,
what all they were saying, and the different angles and twists and things that take place in a story. But when you're 13 years old, 12 years old versus being older, get that wealth of knowledge and experience and wisdom. So
there's lots of really good war books out there. Most of them are from the older, the 70s and before that, but there's some really great stuff there that covers all the wars. I mean, there's a lot of Civil War stories in those, not just the weird war stories, but everything else.
And the fictional stuff like the Weird Wars and G.I. Joes
and things like that.
Which are also great reads.
They're doing a lot of reprints now. Fantagraphics has several great books out, and just some of them are bomb run. And these are reprints from Two-Fisted Tales and Frontline Combat done by John Severin. Excellent stuff. And they also have Blazing Combat, which is the reprints of Blazing Combat from Warren Publishing, Archie Goodwin, and numerous artists. Too many to list. And they also have out one called Aces High, which is more EC stuff. And that's George Evans. Art of George Evans.
When you said Aces High, they're talking about that Kiss guitars on 420.
Yeah, that's it.
Just gotta throw some comedy.
Aces High. Enemy Ace. That was another one that DC had. Tons of. The more I sit here and think about it, Our Army at War turns into Sergeant Rock. Yeah.
Sergeant Rock was always pretty cool.
Yep, Sergeant Rock and Easy Company.
He's a good guy. I know him.
All right. Well,
did we crush it?
I think so. Okay. It's been smashed. It's been obliterated. By good old American know-how.
Yes, and a little bit from me. Well, if you're getting tired of the same old story, please turn some comic book pages and leave any comments in the box below.
And like us on Facebook.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Thank you.